the recording and the transcription, just to confirm to everybody present in this webinar. And from now, I'll be handing over to Heba, and I will remain available for support, reading out any questions that are posted on the chat, and also seeing those that are raising their hands on the webinar for any questions, so on. Your microphones are muted, your cameras deactivated, and when anybody would like to make a question, I will unmute their microphones if they wish to say it themselves. So from now on, Heba, I'm handing this over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Javier, for your support in today's webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues, wherever you are joining us from. We're happy to have you here and joining us in the second webinar, or the third webinar in our disability inclusion series about physical accessibility, setting up an inclusive office environment. Next slide, please. So let me first explain the agenda. We will start by some opening remarks, some introduction, physical accessibility definitions, and we will discuss the different UN instruments and different UN publications that address physical accessibility, with highlighting also the international standards that address physical accessibility. And then we will move on to ask some question in our interactive session, joined by our guest speaker, who is a lady from Pakistan. Her name is Zarguna Wadud. She's a disability inclusion officer in WFP, who will be joining us later today, and we will discuss her experience living with a disability and how physical accessibility actually has benefited her inclusion in her workplace. We will be following that with a Q&A, so if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat or raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you. And also, I would stop during the different sections of the webinar to check in if you have also any questions. Next slide, please. So my name is Heba Khalif. I'm based in Egypt, Alexandria. I have a master's degree from the University of Birmingham in United Kingdom, in inclusive education in developing countries. I have worked in a number of national and international organizations in and outside Egypt, such as the German Agency for International Development and Food and Agriculture Organization. I have been working with the DCO since August 2022 in Disability Inclusion Business Operations Strategy Support Team. And I'm very happy to be with you here today. Next slide, please. So, as you all know, there are 1 billion persons with disabilities worldwide, 80 to 90% of which are of working age, and unfortunately are facing higher rates of unemployment. Women with disabilities even face higher rates of unemployment when compared to men with disabilities. That's because the disability results from the interaction between mental, physical, sensory impairments and the environmental barriers, being a physical environment, the digital environment, and the social or attitudinal barriers that are existing in our societies and communities. So we have in the on this, or United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy, a formula which explains the interrelation between disability and impairment. So if we have an impairment and we have the environmental barriers, this is what results into creating the disabling conditions or the disabling situation. But when the barriers are removed, even without removing the impairment, the disability is will be no longer existing. For instance, if I were to send you in the chat a message which is written in Arabic, and there are non-Arabic speakers here with us in the webinar, and you don't have any kind of impairment, you can actually see the letters. But because I present them to you in a way which is unperceivable by you, this created a disabling situation. So it's essential to remove all the barriers in the environment in order to remove the disabling conditions. Next slide, please.
Yes.
So there are a number of definitions for physical accessibility by the CRPD and that are found in the international standards as well. So physical accessibility is defined as any provisions that are provided to enable users to reach, enter, use, and evacuate any building safely and on an equitable manner with peers, with their peers. Any person, regardless of their ability, of their age, of their health conditions, should be able to use the building and enter and exit the building on a dignified manner. And this is very, very important. Preserving the dignity of the person using the facility is very important. So the United Nations Conventions on the Right of Persons with Disabilities also defines universal design as the design of products and environments to be usable by all people without the need to provide special accommodations or specialized design. Next slide, please.
Yes.
So there are a number of UN instruments that addresses physical accessibility, either by proving the legal framework and the standards that could help country offices assess their premises for physical accessibility, or also provide the legal framework that could govern the work of any organization or institutions. So, for instance, accessibility is included in Indicator 6 of the UNDIS, and this indicator is concerned with the physical and the digital accessibility of the country offices and premises. So the accessibility continuum is describing the experience of children and adults with disabilities since they start their journey moving from their homes to their offices, crossing the roads, using public transportations, and accessing and entering buildings. A continuous route, meaning that circulating through a path should not be obstructed by any obstacles. So, for instance, we can find in some places that the pavement that are supposedly used by persons, pedestrians to walk, are obstructed by different obstacles, signposts, or maybe street vendors who would place their cars in the pavement, or other forms of road obstructions that hinders persons or pedestrians from safely using this pavement. So it is essential when we are assessing our offices to not only to look at the inside of the building, but also to look at the surrounding areas, making sure that this area is barrier-free of any blockage of them. So as you can see in the slide, the metaphor of a chain, if one line of the chain is blocked, so all the chain will be compromised. So if a person with a disability is going to find an obstacle crossing the roads or using the pavement leading to their office, they will not be able to go to the office and access it. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, this is a text of the Article 9 of the CRPD, which addresses physical accessibility or addresses accessibility in general, digital and physical. And it stresses on the importance of providing equal experience to persons with disabilities navigating and interacting with their environment on an equal basis with their peers. It's not only talking about offices, but also about roads, buildings, and transportation facilities. And it is divided into a number of stakeholders, or it explains how each of the stakeholders need to address and need to ensure physical accessibility. So state parties have a role, United Nations organizations have a role, and also individuals and private entities all have a role in providing physical accessibility. Next slide, please. Here we have the UN publications, different publications which addresses the physical accessibility. So the first standard we have is the TTCP plus FS, which is the adopted the building performance manual for design and construction of UN common premises office buildings, which is based on the International Building Code, or the IBC. This standard is adopted by the common premises stream in order to ensure the physical accessibility of the UN common premises offices. Also, the international the UNICEF has accessibility toolkits, and have also created physical accessibility levels, or accessibility levels for constructions and buildings, which provides benchmarks for country offices if they want to apply or assess their premises for physical accessibility, and to put in a short-term and medium and long-term plan. They can rely on these benchmarks for guidance. The BOS as well have another publication, which is the Physical Accessibility Practice Notes, which is which is created in cooperation with the UNICEF. We created the BOS Disability Inclusion technical cards for accessible constructions, which provide more details on the physical accessibility levels, and we will explain more about that in due course. The ILO as well has provided a number of publications in the addressing physical accessibility in workplaces, and we are providing links to those publications in the last slide of the additional resources. Next slide, please. So here in this slide, this is an overview about the international standards that addresses physical accessibility. For instance, standard A117, accessible and usable buildings and facilities, ICC, and C 2009. This is one standard that we're using. And also the ADA, or American with Disabilities Act, have created standards for physical accessibility as well. And in addition to the ISO 2011 International Standard for Physical Accessibility as well. Next slide, please. So universal design has 7 principles, and these principles evolve around the idea of the equitable use, meaning that persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities should be able to use the facilities and buildings equally, without the need to provide specialized provisions. Flexibility in use, meaning that these facilities should be used flexibly, requiring not requiring a lot of effort, or not difficult to be used by persons with disabilities. Sometimes people would or offices would have the accessible entrance at the very back of the building. So persons with disabilities who are using wheelchairs, or using or persons using baby strollers or something, have to walk around the building in order to reach the accessible entrance, which is not in accordance with the universal design principles of universal design. So the buildings also should be simple to use, meaning that the entrance of the building and all the facilities in the building should be very simple to use. Doesn't require a lot of figuring out on the part of the user to try to figure out how this facility is used, how the door should be opened, how the building should be approached or reached. Sometimes, even when I'm walking with my sighted daughter, she has difficulty identifying some buildings when the signage of the building is not clear. So we have to make sure that the buildings are easily and intuitively usable by persons with and without disabilities. The information should be perceivable by everyone, meaning that if we have a signage to a building, we should provide these signage into large letters that could be seen by persons with different visual limitations. We can provide also illumination behind or near to the sign, which would make it easier to see. We can provide contrasting colors that would make the sign easier to see. Not only the signage, but all the different facilities within buildings, as we will see later on. The tolerance for error is another important aspect. If I did something wrong, I should be able to undo this action, and this accessibility and the universal design should enable me to do that. And low physical effort is very important. Sometimes the doors of the building would be so difficult to operate, so that persons with low muscle tones will not be able to open and close these doors. Next slide, please.
Yes, the video.
So now we have a video. So we're going to watch the video and then we are going to continue our discussion.
Okay, thank you. Allow me to play the video. No.
Have you ever encountered a situation like this? Your hands are full of grocery bags. You get to a door. You realize there's no way you can open that doorknob without putting the stuff down. In that case, it's possible you've encountered a round doorknob. For many people, encountering a door without an easily operable lever is usually just a minor inconvenience. But for people with manual dexterity limitations, hand injuries, and other related disabilities, a round doorknob may prevent them from being able to go through that door. If that door had a lever-style handle, it could be operable with a closed fist or even an elbow, making it much more accessible to people with or without disabilities. Similarly, even though power door operators are often designed for people with disabilities, the reality is that they make going through a door easier for all kinds of people, including people using wheelchairs, crutches, and walkers, people carrying a handful of shopping bags, parents with strollers, and delivery people carrying boxes or pushing trolleys. I'm an interior designer, and I often think about how everyday environments could be improved with good design, from overall circulation flows throughout spaces to details like door hardware. And a part of good design is having the awareness and consideration for people of different abilities. While many accessible design components may have initially been designed with disabilities in mind, the vast majority of accessible improvements to products, fixtures, and environments actually end up providing better access for everyone. Automatic toilet flushes, faucets, and soap dispensers are easier to use for people who cannot reach or cannot operate levers, buttons, and valves, but it also makes using a washroom more sanitary and more convenient for most people. Visually contrasting flooring transitions, tactile warning strips, and cane-detectable barriers help many people, whether they have a visual impairment or not, to see and detect oncoming hazards more easily. Over the last few decades, some designers have also adopted the principles of universal design, which is a design approach that considers many different human factors, including abilities, age, genders, and cultural backgrounds. Universal design reframes the approach to how we think about people with disabilities, where their needs are not seen as special circumstances, but as a part of many different human factors that require consideration. For instance, drinking fountains, lavatories, and service counters with high and low surfaces, or desks and tables where the heights are adjustable, are not only designed for the use of wheelchair users, but also for children, older adults, people of different heights, and people with different usage preferences. Simple, easily navigable wayfinding with visual and tactile signage help people with visual and auditory impairments, but can also improve the experiences of people who speak different languages and people with cognitive disabilities. Universal toilet rooms can accommodate not only wheelchair users, but also individuals traveling with caregivers of the same or opposite gender, families with children, as well as people who prefer to use non-gendered washrooms. Often the concept of providing accommodations to disabled people is misunderstood as making disabled people dependent on society to help them, when in fact, accommodating disabilities is pretty much the opposite of that. While some disabled people do require caretakers or guide animals to help them with their day-to-day life, the goal of accessible design is actually to provide independence for people with disabilities. If we provide ways for people to independently open doors, go up levels, use the toilet, get around safely, obtain services, and find information, basically go about their day-to-day life like most other people, then technically they're not disabled anymore. It's important to realize that traditionally we have built our environments to exclude certain people. Disabilities are not inherently possessed by the individual. They're shaped by the barriers we have put up. While it's obviously not practical to immediately rebuild everything, there are still things we can do and steps we can take to remove these barriers. Some may argue that designing and building accessible products and environments can be costly. While that may be true in some circumstances, when it comes to building new spaces and creating new products, there is often not a cost difference to implementing accessible features. Choosing a more visually contrasting color at a change in floor level usually costs nothing as long as the product is the same, and installing one type of door lever over another will result in minimal price differences, if any. But of course, there are still costs to some accessible features, and the retrofitting of existing non-accessible spaces could have a high initial cost. However, in many cases, it is arguably more economically detrimental to ignore accessibility. According to the World Health Organization, around 15% of the world's population live with disabilities, a percentage that's expected to rise in most developed nations due to the increase in the older adult populations. Communities and businesses all benefit from the participation of people with disabilities as consumers as well as being productive members of the workforce. Even in private homes, inaccessible design will also directly and indirectly cost individuals money, such as in the loss of productivity, as well as in the cost of caretakers or people taking time off work to care for disabled family members. By building spaces that accommodate people with disabilities, we can provide them with economic empowerment and independence. And in most cases, we will also improve the quality of life for just about everybody. If you look at it this way, accessible design may just be one of the most morally and physically responsible things we can do. So what do you think? What are some design improvements that you think would benefit accessibility and usability in your life, whether it's at home, work, school, or a public space? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. This video is a part of a series where I discuss the various aspects of the interior design profession. If you're interested, here are some more videos to check out, and please subscribe for more. Until next time.
So thank you very much for playing the video. All right, so let's ask the question that was in the end of the video. Did you implement any kind of physical accessibility measures within your office, and why? If you would like to participate, if you'd like to write in the chat or raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you, please feel free to do so.
Okay, so we have a first order of hands. Lana, that was just put down. Was that by mistake, perhaps? Otherwise, okay, so Lana, will unmute your microphone and please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Lana Safi, and I'm from Lebanon, Asqa, UN Asqa, and we did a couple of stuff in the office that were more accessible for me, as I am a physically disabled person, a person with a physical disability. Especially for the washroom, they made an automatically open door and an automatically locking the door with a sensor, which helped me a lot and reduced the time I had to spend in the bathroom opening and closing the door. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very, very much for sharing this valuable point. You see, such a simple thing as providing an automatic door opening and closing saved a lot of time for her to be able to it enabled her to use her time more efficiently. Pierre, have we
Yes.
we
We have another hand for Mohammed Hanan, so I'll unmute your microphone.
Hi,
Please
good
go ahead.
morning. This is Hanin from IOM Iraq, headquarters in Erbil. So actually, we have started to make our main office accessible. We started with the external ramps and the internal also ramps. We have already elevators, although the building is only 2 floors. But we are still in the process of like changing the bathrooms and putting the signs. But it's a bit difficult in the Iraqi context because, for example, we are renting the place, so we need a lot of let's say permissions to apply this. But what I can say that the good practice that we have in IOM Iraq, that all the facilities of IOM across the country, I would say like 90% of it are accessible, like the youth centers, the the emergency centers, they are all fully accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan.
do we have any more participants?
Yes. Allow me to then give the floor to Gulsara.
Yes.
Second. You may go ahead, Gulsara. Thank you. Gulsara, are you? I can see your microphone is on, but we cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you. Let me disable your microphone and allow it again. Can you try unmuting yourself and speaking out? I'm afraid like we cannot hear you. Would you be
And what
able-
about now?
Okay, now, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, it was from my side, a technical issue. Thank you. My name is Gulsara. I'm from country office, Kazakhstan, Almaty city, common premises. The question is, we have been working on improvement of physical accessibility of our building. Our building is quite new, and there were some recommendations received from local institutions on how on the correspondence to local legislation requirements in terms of disability and to international standards. Now we want to move to the next stage and to prepare terms of reference for construction company on how to make these adjustments, what is possible, right? The problem is that we are not specialists, so the question would be, is there any like guiding subject matter expert within UN system or some organization, or there is some information who can help us to develop these terms of reference from professional architectural or construction point of view? Because again, we will write TOR, and again, we may miss something which is vitally important so that the construction companies can understand what we need from them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. Actually, as I mentioned, there is the TTCP standard for building performance manual for designing accessible constructions, available from the UN Common Premises, and the link of this is going to be shared in the additional resources so that you can have that. And also, if you could email, I can send you my email. And then I can connect you with the persons who are working in the Common Premises stream, who can provide you with some guidance regarding the standards that you can use, and you can share with the construction company.
Okay, we have another question from our colleague Hanin. You may go ahead. Allowing microphone now.
Hi again. Sorry, I have a question. Now we have kind of you know what the companies that they call they are doing smart houses, and we are working on some specific projects in which we are modifying some houses, some shelters for persons, including persons with disabilities. I would ask, like, which option is more proper and better? For example, if I have, you know, like those bottoms for the electricity, you know, to open and close the lights, shall I collaborate with those people who are doing the smart houses to integrate this, like, in which allows the person with disabilities to control the on and off from their phones? Or shall I go to the like regular way of, for example, putting those bottoms in a lower line? Okay, and this is also the same example for the rest. Is it better to go with the technology now and like just pass away some of the old or regular methods for accessibility, or we need always to do both?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Well, first off, it depends on who are you designing these buildings for, because persons with disabilities are a very diverse and heterogeneous group of people. They have different needs and different requirements. So some people who have limited muscle tone, low muscle tone, and limited dexterity would actually benefit from using these automatic sensors to open and close lights. So you cannot really pick one design, and it's not a one size fits all. You cannot pick one design and then you say, okay, this design is going to be designed for everyone. But if in case you are not able to have this design on a case by case basis, I would suggest you opt for the more advanced technique, which is the use of technology to provide automatic sensors to open and closing lights, so that it would enable persons with different needs to and also provide the light switches, the ordinary light switches as well. So you can provide both alternatives if you cannot change your design from one facility to another. Did that answer your question?
Let me Hanin says thanks a lot on the chat. She says yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Perfect.
So no more hands. So maybe we can continue, Heba?
Yes, please. Yes, next slide. So in this slide, we can see different working groups, the different target groups that could benefit from physical accessibility. And as explained in the video, physical accessibility is not designed just for persons with disabilities, but are designed also by children, older adults with and without disabilities, and also by persons carrying heavy equipments, baby strollers and all. And part of the main principle of physical accessibility is to create products which are inclusive of and usable by and accessible to everyone to the greatest extent possible and with the greatest dignity. So as you can see, these are the categories of people that could benefit from physical accessibility. Next slide, please.
Yes.
So these are some tips which country offices can use when they are starting their physical accessibility assessment. The very important thing that we have to consider is we have to consult with persons with disabilities, with all their diversities, and or organizations of persons with disabilities from the start, because this is very, very important. Some people would think that they can consult persons with disabilities as an afterthought or after the project is designed or after the assessment plan is designed, but it's essential to consult them from the beginning. So first of all, we have to find more about the building. We have to find more about its age, its conditions, the facilities that are existing in the building, if the building is rented or owned, if the building is old or new, if the building is government owned. So sometimes it's hard to remediate buildings which is owned by the government. So you have to find more about the building itself. The second thing is to research and identify the relevant regulations for compliance nationally and internationally. So as our colleague has explained, the national law provides the legal framework for physical accessibility compliance, and I'm sure that a lot of countries has domestic laws which addresses this aspect. Also, the international treaties and standards, if the country has ratified on the CRPD, this could be an instrument that we can use. Involving local engineers and architects and urban planners is a key when designing a plan which is fit for the context of the country. And as I said, creating a physical accessibility task team, and this task team could have all the stakeholders within this team, planning more than one visit for persons with disabilities and organizations of persons with disabilities to assess the current conditions of the building and agree on the short and immediate and long-term interventions to improve physical accessibility. It's important for this plan to be revised from time to time to make sure that these measures are still functionable, because sometimes, for instance, buildings would add or agencies would add elevators for persons with disabilities, and the elevator stops functioning. So it's always good to reassess the facilities and reassess our plan to make sure it fits for our needs. We have to gather needed materials and equipments, and finding the equipments is a little bit difficult in some countries and contexts. For example, if you want to build an environment-friendly building using the tactile raised markers to indicate the entrance or the end of the ramps and the approach of the doors, using the tactile floor markings might be difficult to find in some countries. So always be sure to have a few alternatives in case you could not find these materials locally. Next slide, please. Yes. So we have something we call REQ, which is each letter is exploring one concept of the physical accessibility of a building. So R is there are four areas that could commonly arise from for persons with disabilities when they are accessing buildings. First, reach the building. So movement in the outdoor areas or outdoor environment and reaching the building could be difficult. The second concept is enter, E, which stands for entering, exiting, and evacuating a building. Barriers could rise in that regard. The third aspect is C, is circulate, within, which means movement within a building itself, horizontal areas of the building, using the different facilities of the building. And number four, use, U, which stands for using the individual rooms and facilities of the building. These are the four main areas which could result on physical accessibility barriers to individuals with disability. We will start with the first one, which next slide, please. So we will start with the first one, movement in the outdoor environment. So we have to make sure that the pedestrian routes are clear of any blockage or obstacles and would enable them to reach the outside part of the building. as I said, it's very important if not only to adjust, to provide ramp and to provide accessible entrance, but also we have to make sure that the outside surrounding area is also accessible. Next slide. So the second area is entering and exiting or evacuating the building. We have to make sure that the entrance, including final fire exits to a building, is accessible. It should be easy to find and easy to use by any person, irrespective of their impairment during an emergency, especially during an emergency evacuation. Next slide, please. So movement within the buildings, it is very important to make sure that it's easy to find and follow the circular design of the building. And the corridors and doorways are well dimensioned, well lit, and easy to use even during an emergency evacuation by all people using persons with, including persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. So the use of individual rooms and facilities, we have to make sure also that the rooms are well dimensioned to allow for sufficient space for wheelchair users to circulate, and also a person using crouches or a person relying on an assistant or a service animal. So we have to make sure that all fixtures and fittings should be appropriately designed and correctly positioned so as not to cause safety hazard for persons with disabilities. So good lighting or natural, either artificial lighting or natural lighting should be available, and appropriate acoustics should always be considered. And acoustics are very important, not only for persons with hearing impairments, but also for individuals with visual impairments. For example, I'm a person with visual impairment who rely on my sense of hearing to provide more information about the surrounding environment. So it is important when I'm into a room or a corridor or a doorway or a cafeteria or any place inside the building, I should be able to identify the width and the length and the furniture and draw a mental map of this area using sound. So we shouldn't have anything that could block the sound. For example, if we have an area where the wall is covered, it should by a sound absorbent material. This could be an physical accessibility hazard for me, because I wouldn't be able to identify the width of the area and I wouldn't be able to use my hearing sense correctly. So, so the next slide. So here in this slide, we are introducing the physical accessibility levels guidelines that are created by the BOSS Disability Inclusion Support Team and UNICEF, and it provides 3 levels of accessibility. So level A is the basic level, level AA is the moderate level, and level AAA is a advanced level of accessibility. So or high level of accessibility. So we have a moderate level or a basic level, sorry, and we have a good level of accessibility, and we have the high or advanced level of accessibility. Although at first we want to aim for achieving a moderate level of accessibility, we always want to design our long-term plan to reach the highest and the maximum level of accessibility. So this is very good for creating some benchmarks for country offices when they are doing the assessment of their building. Then they can start by aiming for the moderate level, and when they have the necessary resources, they can opt for a more advanced level. So each of these levels identify a number of areas that should be present in order for the building to be accessible. So first we have, for example, for the level A accessibility, we have to have sorry, I'm using my screen reader to read the slides, so it's taking me a little bit of time to because I want to make sure that the content which I'm saying is accurate. So we have to make sure that in the level A moderate accessibility, that one entrance is accessible, one accessible parking place is available, one unisex toilet is available, and one workstation and one meeting room is available. This is for the moderate level. As for the good level of accessibility, we have to make sure that the accessible parking is available along with a pathway leading to the main entrance of a building. More parking spaces should be available for persons with disabilities in the second level, and two or more unisex toilets have to be available. Accessible toilets should be available. In the third level and most advanced level, all workstations or every floor has to have one accessible workstations. All commonly used areas and meeting rooms should be accessible by persons with disabilities. So as you can see in the following table, it explains what each level of the accessibility level, what measures you need to take in order to reach each of these levels. Next slide, please. So we will now talk about each of them separately. And because I'm mindful about the time, I might not be able to go through every slide, but I will be sharing the slide afterwards. So here we have all the measures that we need to follow in order to provide accessible parking. All the dimensions for the width that should be available between the car in the car park in order for a person with a disability to transfer from the car to the to the wheelchair or to the assistive device they are using. We can also see some information about the ramp and the dimensions of the ramp, and also the signage that is going to be provided in the parking space. This signage should be seen from both drivers and passengers alike, and should be illuminated and color contrasted to the surrounding environment or to the surrounding wall in order for it to be easier to see. I want to mention something here, that it is always good to provide other means, even if it's not included in the standards, to provide more physical accessibility. So, for instance, if we can go to the next slide.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a technical issue with my screen reader. So could you tell me just the title of the slide?
Outdoor facilities slide.
Okay, so first, let's talk about outdoor facilities. So outdoor facilities we should always ensure that if there are any water supplies or seats or playground, we should always ensure that these outdoor facilities does not cause a safety hazard or does not cause a blockage in the route that persons with disabilities will use in order to reach the building. And here we can see that we're providing some dimensions that you can use in order to ensure the accessibility of the outdoor environments. Next slide, please.
Yes. Accessible entrances, ramps.
Yes, so in the accessible entrances, we also can see some dimensions of the entrance door, the ramp in which we can use, the pathway from the drop-off area to the accessible entrance, the signage the accessible signage that we should use. I want to point out here a very important issue. Sometimes, even when we apply all of these physical accessibility standards, it's good to install an intercom system. And this is not included in any of the standards, but this is just something from my personal experience. An intercom system outside your building or outside your office will provide the opportunity for securing assistance or help in case the persons with disabilities find any obstacles in entering the building. For example, if I'm a person with a visual impairment and I'm coming to your place for the first time, I'm not familiar with the layout of the building. It's always good to have an intercom system close to the door, close to the main entrance, with the height of maybe 800 to 900 millimeters, so it could be accessible by persons on a wheelchair. And this could be activated by a push of a button that does not require too much physical force. And this intercom system could open a communication channel between the person with a disability and the security personnel inside the building. So in case of any emergency or any difficulty, the person with a disability can use this system in order to contact someone inside the building. So if you can give me just 2 minutes, I need to adjust something technical in my computer to be able to continue reading the slides. So in this meantime, I'd like to know if Zarguna Wadud is here, because she is the person who is going to. All right.
Yes.
So
She's on.
very good. So I can actually give the floor to Zarguna to explain more on her personal experience navigating buildings with the physical accessibility measures in place. And then maybe we can resume talking about the rest of the accessibility measures that we need to install or that we need to be available in our offices. Over to you, Zarguna. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Hiba, for inviting me here and for giving me this opportunity so that I can share my personal experience with you all. So basically, I would start with my introduction. My name is Zarguna Wadud, and I'm from Pakistan, and I do work with the World Food Program as a disability inclusion focal person. And so, like, sharing my experience and jumping into the theme of today's talk, I would share a little about my background also, that I have been working on disability for the last 9 to 10 years as a consultant, as a trainer with different organizations, with different UN agencies. And I came across WFP through an opportunity, and it was basically the initial disability inclusion plan project, which was to be implemented in my province in Pakistan. And I was contacted for that, and I came on board with them, and so we did that. Later on, some positions were being announced. I competed, and so came on board with them as a regular staff. So now, when I talk about my experience with WFP, I would say that it has been amazing. It has been challenging, and I have come across many things, and have learned also a lot. So when I first joined, obviously being a physically disabled person and using the wheelchair, my only concern, my first priority was that how would I get into the office, whether the office is accessible or not. When I was doing the DI project before that, I'm talking about that phase. So my first concern was that, and because most of the times when we go somewhere, when we are invited in some meeting or some anything like that, mostly it happens that the area where we are invited isn't accessible for a wheelchair, and this is mostly not being kept on priority, not considered that seriously. So when I came here, to my surprise, a wooden ramp was placed there, which was very helpful for me to just get into the building, to the ground floor. And when the project started, during that phase, the ramp was also constructed, which was a very positive sign for me. And being a disabled person, being a wheelchair user, I would say that it gives you a sense of inclusion when you see that yes, there is a way for you so that you can come and you also can contribute. So that was the first thing that was done on priority basis. And when I joined, I had to work from 9 to 5. I had, honestly telling you, honestly sharing here, I had a lot of things going on in my mind that whether will I be accepted the way I am, whether my extra needs would be taken care of, whether would I be provided with reasonable accommodation or not. All these things do come into our mind when we like go somewhere and work. And also, I had a fear of this thing in my mind that uh, if I ask for anything, will I sound demanding? Will that have an effect on my job or like the all? It was a mixed platter. So when I joined, the brand was constructed. I had a accessible workplace, and then comes the washroom. The washroom at first was it was accessible for me, but the door was quite narrow, so I had to like struggle a little bit getting in. And but I would say that I'm fortunate enough that I had a very amazing supervisor who took notice of this also on priority. And the road was sorry, the door was widened, and now I can easily go and out and like use the washroom very easily. And then comes the entrance paths. They are made accessible for me, and have been allotted a slot, accessible slot of parking where I can park my car. So like sharing all these things here have a reason uh, that I'm accepted the way I am with taking care of my needs. And this gives me a sense every day of being included. This gives me a sense of being confident every day that yes, my contribution, my being here in this office is as important as other employees are. So I think this is something very important when it comes to disability, because it isn't about like giving an employment to a person with a disability. It's about taking care of his or her specific needs. You have to like put away the obstacles, the hurdles that comes in his or her way. Using the twin track approach, you have to mainstream people with disabilities, but you have to target the hurdles, target the specific needs. And this was something that is happening in my office, and I'm really happy. And my journey has been going on amazing. It's hardly a year here, but I hope and I wish that I can continue for years. And so now when we talk about as Hiba shared her presentation, I noted down some points from there, and I would like to talk on it. When it comes to research and identification, I think this is something that we lack when we talk about people with disabilities, because it depends on the research that you have made, and then only you can identify the obstacles that and the hurdles that comes in your way. Because mostly we are brought up with a mindset that we are good for nothing, and the problem is all with us. It's not with the environment. It's not with the society. But when you have a research and when you know about your rights and you know that there are policies that exist for you, then you become that confident that you can accountable the departments, you can accountable the organizations for providing you that infrastructure. So I think research and identification and then accountability, all these things go hand in hand. And a person with a disability at first should be aware of their rights, and they should have some research on it, and then you can like identify the hurdles that comes in your way every day. And that hit me hard was unfortunately the point which Hiba said that 80 to 90% of person with disabilities in their employment age are unemployed. This is something that really is alarming for us all, because uh, because I also can see that there is a lot happening on disability, but it is limited to advocacy and awareness only. We do not give employment opportunities to people with disabilities. We do not give them that space where they can also share their views with you, where they can contribute, where they can also have their sense of how they feel to be included. And as we all very strongly I also believe in this slogan, nothing about us without us. So when there is a policy for us, where there is a talk on our rights, I think I should be a part of it. And it can only be possible if you give an employment opportunity to a person with a disability, and that in that forum, in that organization, then only he or she can tell what 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 they actually want. It's about their needs, it's about their rights, right? And also, I would say that, as I earlier also said, that we need to have some research. And when it comes to the convention, when it comes to policies, we do have a very rich content in the shape of CRPD, which Article 9 talks about all accessibilities. So I think when you represent on some forum, you have to have that knowledge through which you can put your point with some logics. So CRPD is that kind of a document, and we all should have some nose and house of it. And last but not the least, there is a question that always comes into my mind, and I would also like to put in here also when the floor is open to the audience, and would like to hear from you also that if you have a if you are well aware of your rights also, but still you don't have that will to fight for your rights, then that awareness is of no use. And uh, how can we give that will to person with disability so that they can also be that confident, that vocal, so that they can talk at any forum for their rights. And the second question is that how can we ensure the physical accessibility of an inclusive office environment for person with disabilities beforehand when we haven't employed them, right? If, for instance, this office, according to the office staff, according to the organization, is fully accessible for people with disabilities, but if I'm not there, I haven't experienced it, how can they claim that it's accessible? So this is, I think, we need to discuss on this. Rather, the person with disabilities should be given employment first, or rather the infrastructure should be made accessible for them. So yeah, thank you. That was all from my side. Thank you, Heba.
Thank you very much, Zarguna, for all the valuable and insightful points you have raised. First of all, about the importance of consulting with persons with disabilities and making them an active participants in the planning phase and the implementation of our physical accessibility plans. And then, of course, with making them aware of their rights and the reasonable accommodation available from their offices in order to ensure equitable employment. I also want to bring this what Zarguna has mentioned to context of whether should we provide physical accessibility first or should we employ persons with disability first. So if we can go back to the slide of accessible parking, please, Javier. So in this slide, we can see that there's a mention of if you have your office environment is constructed in a way that cannot be remediated. You have no accessible parking, for instance, available. So we can always take note of the available good parking places, accessible parking places in the area, and we can make a record of this nearby accessible bays and alert persons with disabilities or direct them to park their cars in these areas. Also, the provision should be preferably we should make to we should opt for sheltered parking or parking spaces that are reserved for persons with disabilities, which are sheltered from rain and sun and water, so that it wouldn't be causing accessibility hazards. All I want to say is we should make a clear research in our surrounding environment, even if our offices does not have a parking associated with it. It's an old government building. We have to point out any accessible facilities that we can use to their benefits. Then we find in the slide some do's and don'ts that things we have to avoid when we are creating accessible parking spaces, and things that we should do when we are creating accessible parking spaces. Next slide, please. In the outdoor facilities, we have to make sure also that we account for other hazards like bicycle stands or all these facilities, because sometimes when we look at the outdoor areas, we automatically think, oh, we don't have ramps, we should install ramps. But outdoor facilities has a lot of things. If the ramp is too long, we should install some seats, and some seats with arms that the user, that the individual or the person can grab hold of and use to sit or to stand. And always make sure that there is a free passage to the main entrance of the building, and these seats are safe to use and safe to operate. So make sure that the outdoor areas with all its facilities is accessible and there is no obstructions or blockage to the way. So next slide, please. Sorry, accessible doorways?
We're on the accessible entrance ramps.
Yes. So here in this slide, you can find some dimensions of the ramps. I'm not very good with numbers, and I don't want to mention the wrong number. So this slide is provided with all the dimensions that have to be present in the accessible ramp. And when we will share the slide, we will make sure that this picture is presented into an accessible format, because it's currently is presented as an image. All right. If we go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
Door handles, is it?
Yeah, the
Okay.
entrance, including final fire exits.
Yes, we have to make sure that the entrance is accessible. The door handle can be operated by any person regardless of their ability, that there are not much physical effort which is required in order to operate the door handles. Sometimes I used to work, a long time ago, I used to work in a place that has the accessibility, physical accessibility ISO. And although this place had these ISO certificates, it's very hard to operate the doors because the doors were so heavy, and not all the doors has automatic operational mechanisms. Some doors requires you to push. So it's essential to make sure that these doors and door handles are accessible. Next slide, please. So reception counter desks are very important when we approach a building or an office for them to be accessible. So it's good, first of all, to make sure that the security gate would allow persons using a wheelchair to pass. There is a sufficient space between the reception desk and the surrounding area for wheelchair users to maneuver 360 degrees using their wheelchairs. We have to make sure always that the reception desk can be used by people standing or sitting, or sitting on a wheelchair. So sometimes when the reception desk is very high, persons on wheelchair cannot talk to the receptionist or person in charge. So also we have to make sure that other reception furniture should be positioned to allow space to maneuver, as we said, for persons with disabilities. Next slide, please. So accessible doorways and corridors. The main horizontal circulation circulation design should be level on each floor without any steps in order to ensure that the building is accessible to all people, including persons with disabilities. Where there are some differences in level, these differences, they cannot be avoided. Make sure to install some ramps or lifts in order for persons with disabilities to be able to access. The accessible elevators and lift locations should be accessible by all people and should be easy to see and easy to operate. And also they have to be well dimensioned, and the controls on these elevators should be able to be operated by a person with different impairments. Sometimes you would have the controls of the elevator placed too high or too low for a person who is using a wheelchair to operate. Sometimes you do not have braille signs on these controls. Sometimes you do not have audio controls in order to help users to control these switches and use this and operate the elevator. So that was the next slide. Sorry, in the accessible elevator, I get ahead of myself and I talked without alerting you that it's the next slide. So I apologize. So in the next slide about stairs and escalators, we have to make sure that the stairs are very well lit and very well dimensions, and that the landing areas should be clear of any obstacles and obstructions, including the path of the swing of the door, for example. So if the stair is close to a door, we have to make sure that there is a sufficient space when the door is opened for a person who is using a wheelchair to maneuver. Where there is a half landing or a 1 degree turn, it should never be less than 1500 millimeters, 1500 millimeters wide. And we have to ensure that this is that all these landing areas and the start of the stairs and the end of the stairs are clearly marked in color contrasting tools, using the color contrast tools in order to be easily seen and identified by persons with disabilities. Also, we can install some tactile warning for persons with disabilities that we are approaching the start of the stairs or the end of the stairs. This is very, very helpful for white cane users. That's, of course, in addition to visual contrast between landings and the top and bottom step of the flight of stairs. Next slide, please.
Before going into the next slide, Heba, we have a question from Hanin, and it reads as follows: if the elevators are old and we cannot change, shall we add numbers of the levels on Braille as we cannot add audio? That's the question.
Yes, of course, we can opt for adding the numbers in Braille, and we can install an intercom system in the elevator and the help button. And we have to ensure that this intercom system is the highest of the intercom system is between 80 and 90, 800 and 900 millimeters, to ensure that it could be operated by persons with the disabilities. Okay, you can definitely install Braille buttons instead.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So do you have any questions before moving to the next slide?
I'm monitoring the chat. No further questions right now. And Hanin says thanks a lot. So I think we're safe to move on. Yes.
Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Sorry, I have difficulty with my screen reader today. I don't know, for some reason it doesn't cooperate with me.
We're on the accessible offices and interior design.
Yes, so in this slide you can see some references that are coming here from the UNICEF technical cards for accessible construction, and measures and recommendations may vary in international standards. So be sure to be aware of all the international standards that are used. Sometimes, as we said, the Common Premises Work Stream has provided us with some standards for the accessibility of the common premises. And also there are some differences in the dimensions between the accessibility kit from UNICEF and other international standards. So always make sure to consult these international standards. Next slide, please. So lighting and light switches are very important. It's important to have these light switches at a reasonable height that would enable persons with wheelchair users to use them. And we have to make sure that using these light switches does not require much force, because users with limited dexterity might find it difficult to turn on or off the lights. Also, something which I face as a person with visual impairment, sometimes people would have a room with 2 doors, and beside each door, there's a light switch turning on and off the lights. So if someone used this light switch on one door, when I try to turn off the light switch on the other door, it will change, because it will change the way that switch looks, meaning that, for example, when I turn on the light, the raised end of the light switch is to the is on the top of the switch. When I turn off the light, the raised end of the switch is at the bottom of the switch. So if we have lights in 2 doors, these accessibility measures that I'm using, having the top the switch raised on the top part for the lights to be turned on, and having the switch raised on the bottom part for the off switch, will be changing. So make sure that if you have a room with multiple doors, do not provide more than one light switch that can be used by everyone, because having more than one light switches makes things confusing. Also, you have to make the switch itself is bigger. The buttons on the control switch is bigger, so that persons with low muscle tone and low sense of touch can identify and feel the buttons and able to use them easily. Next slide, please. So when we are considering windows, we also have to make sure that the windows provides view of the room for a person sitting or standing. So the window height should be considered, and the window dimensions as well should be considered. We have to check the accessible dimensions for windows. And also, you should consider the materials that are used to create the windows. Some materials might cause allergies. Some materials might not be able to. People might not be able to use in heat conditions, or when the weather is very hot, or when the window is wet. The window is wet. So make sure that the switches and control window handles are operable under any weather conditions or dry and wet conditions as well. Next slide, please.
For your reference, Eva, allow me to interrupt quickly. We have 10 minutes before the allotted time, and we have maybe, I think, just 4 more, 3, 4, 5 slides and the practical tips before the Q&A, just to give you the heads up.
Thank you very much. All right, so I might not have time to go for each part of the building as I'd like to be. So if we can move to the practical tips slide.
Yes.
And just give me 2. For creating accessible building, first of all, we have to sorry, it's a screen reader again. You have to keep floors firm and slip resistant in order not to cause hazards. And also, we have to use tactile markings to mark the different parts of the building, like the corridors would have a certain feel to them, different from the offices, and make sure to install tactile markings at the bottom and top of the stairs and in the landings and in the approach of any doors or steps. Make sure to keep doorways and walkways free of clutters, free of furniture, in order to provide a safe route for persons with disabilities. Make sure to keep staircases and corridors and evacuation paths well lit in order for persons to be able to use them. Use non-reflective glass on windows and doors because this will cause some visual problems for persons with some visual limitations. And also use contrasting colors and raised line textures to identify any parts of the building, being a door or an office or a toilet or a flight of stairs. Always use braille signs, use large print tactile letters, use contrasting colors, and also use edge corner guards on tables and on any corners in the walls to avoid that the person might accidentally bump into them, so to provide more safety measures. And as you can see, this is a video that explains how to use the protective bands and protective marks for tables and for walls. And you can use slip-resistant handrails on toilets or on ramps. Make sure that the guardrails or the handrails that you are using is slip-resistant. Avoid using metal because metal is very sensitive to weather. It could get very cold or very hot, and it could get slippery if wet. So be sure to use the material which is not much affected by the dry and wet conditions and the different weather conditions. And avoid constantly moving or relocating items. This is very, very important. Avoid relocating items and moving them because persons with visual impairment, for instance, draws a mental map of the place in which they are in or their office. So relocating or moving these items will not enable persons with visual impairments to reach for them. And also it could help persons with cognitive impairments as well. The use of braille is very important. Also, do not leave cables hanging on the floor or that might cause tripping to persons who are using wheelchairs. If you are using carpets, make sure that this carpet is not slippery and is firmly fixed to the floor so that it would not cause trips. So these are all the tips and the practical tips that I want to share with you. And this is all from my side. I apologize for any technical issues. The screen reader is not cooperating, unfortunately, for today. Let's hope that in the next webinar, the screen reader is going to function better. Please, if you have any question, feel free to share them with us today. Over to you, Javier.
Thanks, Heba. So I looking at the chat right now, and I encourage your colleagues to raise their hands if there are any questions. I know we've gone through some questions and answers throughout the webinar, but if there are any outstanding questions from the participants, please go ahead and either type it on the chat or simply raise your hand. In the meantime, so I think one of the burning request has been to ensure we deliver the recording and presentation to our colleagues. So we will take care of that. Thanks for letting us know. And also we'll be sharing recordings and links, the presentations for the previous sessions. So I think that as you have gone through the webinar, Heva, I think that 10 different comments has been from our colleagues requesting the recordings and presentations. We have some comments from Hans Hall. Thanks for an excellent presentation. for Hala Fayette, many thanks. And so many other colleagues that also had to leave earlier, such as Lana El Cafe, saying thank you very much for your presentation. It's very important. So I think that's the overall. Those are the questions that we were like comments really that we were receiving. So thanks everybody. Zakir Rasak, thanks Heba for the excellent presentation. Sweet Muhammad, thank you. Nancy, thank you very much for your fruitful session. And many more thank you messages such as Sarguna, Heba, that was an excellent presentation. And I would like to leave, see you again. Anastasia, Andronaci, thank you. These will help us a lot. And please share any guidelines you have. We will love to follow them for upcoming office renovations. So that's excellent. Then Lara Osukerhin as well. What an incredible presentation. Thanks, colleagues. It will be super useful. Sophia, Ismail, thanks, Heba and team for the great sessions. Nisar, thank you. Shaima, many thanks for your efforts, dear Heba. It is the most informative session. Best regards. Sakir Rasak, thanks. Sarguna for sharing your experience. Jocelyn Imad, thank you, colleagues. Josephine Ankola, thank you. Sid Song, thanks for the wonderful presentation. Gabriela Giovannoska, thank you, very useful. Mohamed Hanin, super thanks. Gimani, and very useful information. Looking forward to have the presentation for wider sharing. Srijana, thank you. Farah, say that very helpful. Many thanks. Thanks everybody, and apologies if I've mispronounced any of the names. Thanks for the comments. I think it's been a pleasure from our side. It's been great assisting you, Heba, and everybody in this conversation today. So over to you for any final comments. And before I forget, allow me to quickly, I'll stop sharing the screen now. Allow me to quickly share with you all a form where we would like to have your rating in terms of this webinar. So you might go ahead and simply answer there's very few questions on the overall webinar, such as the objectives, if the objectives of the webinar have been reached, the relevance and importance, the overall satisfaction, intention to apply, the information and learning. So we do encourage you, and we will really appreciate that if you can take a couple of minutes of your time and fill in that form, because that will really inform us into improving upcoming webinars presentations. So with that said, over to you, Heba.
Thank you very much, Javier. I just want to thank you for your excellent support and moderation of this webinar, and I would like to give my extensive thanks also to Zarguna for her time and for her excellent presentation and for her dedication. So I really appreciate it, and I want to thank our colleagues for joining us. Remember that we have our upcoming webinars. So if Javier, if we could just share the last slide of the upcoming webinars for our audience to look at. Please be sure to tune in and register to the upcoming webinars. There are a lot of interesting topics to follow and different aspects relating to disability inclusion. We wish to see you all there. So thank you very much, and see you in future webinars.
Thanks, everybody. I'll stop the recording now.